Hello and welcome to Dragonfire Inc. Today's topic is writing emphasis, and this is lending emphasis to an idea in a sentence, or in a passage. But there's several different ways to accomplish this. We're going to be talking about climax, suspense, abnormal word order, sentence length, repetition, rule breaking, and then typeface. So the first one is climax. Climax is just very natural for us that are English speakers and probably in other languages as well, but it's just having your list. If you're listing something or doing something similar to a list, you're saving the most important for last, the most dramatic for last. And an example would be unordered. You would say hurricanes kill people, they destroy property and disrupt wildlife. It's kind of bland. But if you put in an order of climax, it's hurricanes disrupt wildlife, destroy property, and kill people. Like, wow, hurricanes are bad. You wouldn't think that if it's all jumbled up, Another way would be saying, like, my hope is gone, forgotten, obliterated. So it's a lot shorter of a list, but you start with the kind of bland gone, and then you go to obliterated. Like, you make it worse as it goes on, or more dramatic. The other one would be order of depth. So this is where you start with just a bland description or a bland kind of abstract idea and you expand it out. You make it more in depth, more concrete as you go, and this will lend emphasis to the idea as a whole. So it was a brown vase, marbled and colored, shaped with elegance and care, and thin enough to appear as delicate as a flower petal glazed with morning dew. So that whole idea, because it started small and kind of grew, can really show that extra emphasis. So with just the regular listing, it's bad if you do it unintentionally, but if you throw it out of order on purpose, it can often be used to comedic effect. And to that end, I have two quick clips to show you, and I hope you enjoy.
That's right. Now, if you two don't mind, I'm going to bed before either of you come up with another clever idea to get us killed, or worse, expelled.
She needs to sort out her priorities.
Look away, look away, look away, look away. The show will wreck your evening, your whole life and your day. Every single episode is nothing but dismay. So look away, look away, look away.
Alright, welcome back. So we just talked about climax and how that can be reversed. Now we're going to talk about suspense. And suspense is very similar. The reason why is because there's a lot of emphasis at the end of your sentences just naturally. So these are just tricks to save the interesting thing until the end of the sentence, because the reader is going to latch on to the end of the sentences more than any other part of the sentence. And you can also kind of do this to the beginning of a sentence as well, but there's more at the end, so that's why we're talking about that. And the first way of showing suspense is by saving the key idea until the end. An example would be, I think, however, that he is wrong. So you're ending with a wrong, and that's the idea you really want to push out there. Or you could say, saving the meaning of the sentence until the end. So you could save the key idea, whatever you're trying to emphasize, or if without that last word or that last couple of words, the sentence won't make sense. So an example of this would be, certainly the fastest, most magnificent creature I ever saw was this horse. So you're saving that subject, that essential idea, until the very end of the sentence. And that can work really well to lend that emphasis. Alright, the next one, you have to use all of these with caution, obviously. Using too much of the same form of emphasis with your writing it's going to lose its effect. So use with care, especially these next couple ones. Abnormal word order. So this is where you take a regular sentence and you're just moving stuff out of order, and it's very poetic if done well. If done not well, it's going to be too jarring to the readers, so make sure you're doing this carefully. The first example is, him I picked from all the rest. It's a lot more interesting to say it that way than I picked him from all the rest. By saying him I picked from all the rest, you're really lending more to that idea. Him I picked from all the rest. And again, like we said, we're starting the sentence with that. This next example, so far we lesser men cannot go. It's a lot more interesting than saying we lesser men cannot go so far. Here we're using the beginning and the end of the sentence. So far we lesser men cannot go. So far and go are just capping that sentence and really giving it that extra push. So the next way we're going to talk about is by sentence length. And this is most often accomplished by using a long sentence or a string of long sentences and then having this short, abrupt sentence at the end. And it can really, for sentences that would otherwise be bland and uninteresting, it can really give that extra oomph to it. So the example is, pine needles and scratchy twigs slapped her and tugged her hair as she dashed through the young trees to her house, to her family. Every upgrown root, every pine cone or creature dug hole in the ground seemed deliberate attempts to keep her from getting there in time. At last she crashed through the heavy branches, covering her face with her arms, and burst into the clearing. It was too late. So, as you can see, it was too late was just a bland sentence. It would be forgotten if it was within this long kind of prosy sentence, but because it's short after all that other description and it's short, it really stands out. The next is repetition, and if you're like most writers, repetition can be the bane of our existence. It's something we fall into, and we generally want to edit out any unintentional repetition. But if you're trying to lend emphasis, repetition can be a very powerful force for good. And there's two different ways to lend or to show repetition, and that's through phrases or words, and that's the obvious one. And this can be used to affect a lot in speeches. A good example is the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. If it's been a while, or if you don't know that speech, I recommend taking the time to look at it. But we're not going to go through that here. The other way is through use of syntax, and that's just constructing your sentences in the same way, or constructing both like parts of a sentence in the same way. And this can really lend emphasis or show contrast to an idea or a string of ideas. And how we're going to show that is through this book right here, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I'm going to read the introductory sentence / paragraph. So, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. So as you can see, that just really makes it stand out, makes it pop. Another well-known quote from the same book, same author, is, "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known." So not only is that using the repetition of words and phrases, it's having that similar construction on both ends of that sentence. And it can really work well to show that extra degree of emphasis. So the next and last way to show emphasis, other than typeface, is rule breaking. So grammar, for the most part, is your friend. Grammar lets you take your ideas and send it smoothly out to the readers, because readers know grammar if they are experienced readers. So having that break of rules, having that kind of diversion is just, it can stand out, and it can be done well, if done intentionally, if you're trying to lend that extra emphasis. So an example is, as he passed through the district square, Stephen glanced unwillingly at that which he had ignored on his way in. A long gallows displayed a line of shadows. The wind beat against them, making them rock to or fro. They looked like an army of wraiths. Stephen crossed his arms and shivered. He could smell them, even with the cold breeze and the blanket of snow. He scanned the rank of the dead to see if he could recognize the shape of the poor old innkeeper. He tried to call up the image of that bald little man, but instead the only image he found among the wraiths was his own, decayed lips half smiling. And obviously that last sentence is not grammatically correct. It's missing its subject, among other things. But there's times when you can try to jar the reader the same way the characters jar. And I don't know if that's working the way I want it to, but it's another tool in the toolbox, basically. So the last are just kind of the easy go-to solutions for emphasis. I don't recommend them in formal writing. They're things like italics, and then having quotes on things that aren't dialogue, using all caps, exclamation points, or interrobangs. The most common and most accepted form of this kind of emphasis is italics. I would say it's more, and this is just my personal opinion, I would say it's more justified in something like dialogue. If you're writing dialogue, it's not common that a person would think through that dialogue enough to change their word order to really lend that emphasis. So it makes sense to me to use italics there. But things like all caps, for example, all caps can make it look really informal. If you're trying to submit a manuscript and when the characters are yelling at each other, it's in all caps, it's not going to look like it's a professionally done manuscript. And then exclamation points, you're going to want only one, and you're only allowed one, and you're not allowed to put them with question marks in formal writing. And even then, I would caution against the overuse of exclamation points, because if you can do that emphasis more naturally through the words you choose, through the way you say it, then that is the better way to go. But of course, every rule is there to be broken. There's books that do italics and all caps and all sorts of crazy stuff with the font to lend emphasis, and works really well. But if you're newer, I would caution you to learn how to write formally before breaking all those rules and doing what you want. And that's all I have for today. I hope you learned something about writing and about emphasis, and I hope you go forth and write. Have a good day.